I'm revisiting here something I've said before. I'm doing it again and I hope to be more clear in what I'm saying because I think it's important. And it's about the famous old question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. And this is posed as an, a very good question to ask and an insoluble question. It's meant to indicate a quandary, something that can't be solved, a problem that's just insoluble, very difficult to handle. But I think that it is an easy question to answer. And the reason that there's a confusion about the question, and the reason it's seen as a difficult question, is because of an assumption that's made. And this assumption that we make is incorrect. But this assumption leads us in the wrong way of thinking. And so we end up not knowing the answer to that question. But the answer to the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, the answer is that the chicken came first. And people see this as a very difficult question because they're thinking it's impossible for the chicken to exist without an egg. And that's the incorrect assumption that we make. We assume that the chicken must have come from an egg. And therefore, it's not possible for the chicken to come first. The egg must come first. But then the egg can't come first because there's no chicken to lay the egg. And so you get yourself caught in the trap of thinking because of this incorrect assumption. And the assumption is that the chicken must have come from an egg. And that's not the correct assumption. The right way of thinking about it is that chickens now come from eggs. This is how we eat chickens now. It is not the case that the first chicken must have come from an egg. So if we change our way of thinking, we solve the problem. And so the first chicken came about some other way than from an egg, or some other way. Who knows what that way is? That's a different question. But so the answer is that the chicken came first. And then producing eggs to make new chickens became the way that we got new chickens. But the first chicken came about some other way. Then producing eggs became the way we got new chickens. And that's the right way of thinking about it, and that answers the question. I used to think that that question was insoluble until I changed my way of thinking and looked at the assumptions that I make in my thinking, and I saw where I made the error. I assumed that any chickens we have must come from eggs. And that's not the correct assumption. The right assumption is that chickens now come from eggs. But it's not necessarily the case that the first chicken must come from an egg. So it shows how the importance of being able to change your way of thinking when looking at a problem. And be careful in what you assume to be true. Because sometimes the assumptions that we make seem absolutely true and valid, and we have faith in them. But in reality, we need to be careful in what we assume to be true. And we need to see sometimes that our assumptions might be incorrect. And the things we assume lead us into thinking certain ways, and those ways might not be correct because the assumptions might not be correct. So we need to be very careful when we think about a problem, when we think about anything. We need to be very aware of what we assume to be true and ask ourselves, is what we assume definitely true? Or could there be some other answer? So as I said, the answer to the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, is the chicken came first. And it came about some other way than an egg. But then producing eggs became the way we got new chickens. But it wasn't the way we got the first chicken. So that is the way to solve that problem, and it applies to many other things we think about. We need to be very careful on what we assume to be true, because if we assume the wrong thing, then it leads into all kinds of incorrect thoughts, or possibly no thoughts. So if we're careful about what we assume to be true, then we can make progress sometimes. So keep that in mind. I think it's very important.